Hi, it's Remy and welcome to this week's video. So in this video, I'm gonna share with you some ways to use your wide-angle lens so that you can use it appropriately when you are doing landscape photography. An ultra-wide-angle lens is, for example, the one I have here. It's an XF 10 to 24 millimeters on my Fuji X-T3, and this wide-angle lens is actually the one that got me really started with photography. So this is really a crucial piece in your gear as a landscape photographer, and you should definitely not omit it. But beware, because this is also a lens that doesn't let you use it as easily as others. So you really need to master it. It's not so complicated once you got it, but it's still a lot of work to really master it completely. And even to this day, I sometimes still struggle using it in certain ways. So let's get to it and let me show you this beautiful place in the Lofoten Islands. So let's start with a little bit of theory. So a wide-angle lens can be used in portrait orientation or in landscape orientation. I find it personally easier to use in a portrait orientation because things tend to kind of fall in place more easily, while when you're using it in landscape orientation, you tend to have a very wide angle, and then it's a little bit more complicated to get things into the frame and making sure everything is in place and that nothing looks very small. When you use your wide-angle lens, there are like 2 to 3 elements that you need to have, and 2 are kind of mandatory. The first one would be a foreground. You need a very interesting foreground so that your wide-angle lens take all its advantage, because a wide-angle lens distorts the subjects on the top and down when used in portrait orientation. And therefore, when you have an interesting subject like a flower, like a crack, like these pieces of ice, as you can see here, we will see this as an example later, then you will emphasize those parts of the image and make them really outstanding in your photograph. And then the second thing that you might need, but is not mandatory, would be a middle ground. In this situation here, we don't really have a so interesting middle ground because it's a frozen fjord actually, and the whole fjord is frozen here until the mountain that you see on the background, and therefore the middle ground is not so present here. But in certain cases that can be grass, that can be a lake, that can be different things. Very interesting, that can make also contrast with colors that are really important to consider when you're taking your photographs. And the last important part, I guess you got it, it's a background. And in this case, it's a mountain. In many cases, you will see wide-angle lenses used with mountains because these are kind of the perfect subject to photograph with. And similarly as the foreground, the background can also be distorted with the top of the lens once used appropriately. And so you emphasize both the background and the foreground. And in this case, you really get an amazing effect with your wide-angle lens. Most people will use their camera at, let's say, eyes height, meaning that your normal height between 160 and 190, I would say. And then you will get a kind of very poor sensation with your camera. So let me show you. So if I'm using here at the normal size, it kind of still look quite nice because of course the foreground here is really nice and the background too. But what you want to do is to play around, and you can also use your phone for this because your phone today probably has a wide-angle lens too. And now if you get closer to your subject, so first of all you can emphasize it like very well, and if you can see like what I am doing here, and I can move it around a little bit and really emphasize it and put it at the right position. And as you can see here, when I'm moving the camera, like when I tilt it towards the top, the bottom is emphasized, and when I tilt it down, the top part of the camera, of the subject, of the scene, is also emphasized. And you want to find the right balance by having, of course, sufficient sky, sufficient foreground and that everything is balanced in the photograph. I know that sounds kind of simple when it's said like this, but the truth is, like here, the subjects are fairly obvious, but it's not always the case. So sometimes you really need to get creative to have your subject all together. Another difficulty that you might have with your camera when you are using your wide angles is to make sure that all the elements that you have in here are in place so that it leads really towards the subject and the mountain, which is over there. And in this case, as you can see here on the screen that I'm displaying here, is that the cracks here in the ice are really leading a path that goes towards the mountain back there. I didn't put too much sky because the sky is blue now and it's not so interesting, so I just want to ensure not to have too much empty space, so I prefer to keep a little bit that I can then post-process, but then I'm not gonna use too much. And the foreground is really like more than 3/4 the picture, so it's really important, as I told you before. And in this case, it really leads the path towards the mountain, and that's exactly what we are looking for in this situation, and that's really the beauty of it. I am a big fan of wide-angle lenses. It's really amazing. Once you master them, or once you know how to use it, I don't know if I master it, but at least I know how to use it, then you really have a lot of fun. Another important thing here is to learn how to focus. So when you are in this situation, if you focus on the back, then you won't be able to get everything in focus in your picture. So you would need to make 2 focus points and then focus stack the pictures in post-processing. So you would focus on top of your image, so on your background, and you would focus at least on 2 points, on the background and on the foreground. And ideally, you want to focus in the middle ground just to make sure that everything will be in focus. And use a higher aperture, like a higher f number. For me, I'm using on my XF 10 to 24, the f13. That's my go-to between f10 and f13. In this case, I'm using f13. And that's something that you should really not omit, because you might just mess up your photographs. It happened to me, so trust me, you don't want this to happen. And so now, as I told you, using the wide-angle lens in landscape orientation is not an easy task either. In my opinion, this is something that I still sometimes struggle to master, and I'm not very proud of it, but I'm really working on it in order to make sure that it's improving. And I want you to first start with a good base, so that at least you know where to start from. You don't start from scratch and you don't get lost and get a bit disappointed with what you have. At least if you get a base, you will know where to start from and then move ahead and probably only improve. At least I hope. So the way you want to do it is you want to have your scene, so in landscape orientation, but you want to make everything so that it doesn't look too small. It has to look everything in proportion. So here we're in a perfect situation because the mountain on the background there is really rather big and it's really imposing. I don't have too much sky, as you can see here on the screen, and I am basically using the same cracks in the ice as I did before. But now what I introduced, which is a different thing from before, and that's something I needed time to understand, it's that I used here the crack in the front. Like you can see here the crack, and I am using this crack here to frame somehow my picture, and that will create kind of a frame at the bottom of the image that will lead my viewer eyes towards the rest of the picture. And that's one of the most important things. So you can use this in many variations. So that can be a river, that can be various whatever, some cracks, some fences, whatever you deem interesting, but always use something that will kind of frame your picture. So it doesn't have to be at the bottom in the front of the image. It can also be coming from the side, but leading the eyes towards the subject. So this is something really important. And once again, try to put yourself at the right height. Don't be like at high sight, but be usually a bit lower so that you give a bit more importance to those different elements in the photograph. So I'm gonna shoot a bit around and then we will discuss later on in the motorhome so that you can once again see the concrete results of what I'm talking about. All right, see you later. Hi there, I'm back in my motorhome, and before we continue, I just wanted to tell you that in case you're planning and coming to the Lofoten and visiting it, but you're unsure about what to bring and what to expect, then you can take a look at the link here and see exactly what you could expect and what gear to bring. This is a video I released some time ago, and I'm pretty sure that could be helpful for you in case you have like some uncertainties and you just want to make sure you're totally ready to come here. All right, let's get back to our main topic. I had an amazing evening, but it was also filled with a little bit of frustration because, first of all, it got a little bit more trickier and complicated than I thought to photograph with a wide angle where I was, because not everything was perfect, not everything was in place, and I had to work actually quite a bit on myself to find nice compositions. But I finally make it, so I'm kind of happy of the result I got. So it's very good. And the other thing is that the place I was like totally on shadows. And I could see that behind the mountains that were around me, there was an amazing sun, an amazing sunset. The light would have been delightful. But the truth is that if I would have taken my motorhome and drove away, that would have needed about half an hour to reach another point. And I would have missed all the fun. So in the end, I decided to stay where I was. So one lesson here is to sometimes accept where you are and accept to do what you do. Because if I wanted to catch that light there and go, I would have just struggled to find a composition. I would have been in rush. I would have maybe taken some risk on the road and so on. So it just doesn't make sense to take any risk and just, miss the chances that you could have to take great photographs where you were. So in the end, I accepted the fact and I stayed where I was. I actually wanted to share with you some of the photographs that I took today. And I'm going to share with you and go into the details of two of the photographs I took that are one in landscape orientation and another one in portrait orientation. I think that's the best way to show you exactly what you can do and what's the best use of a wide angle lens. So let's get on the computer and let's check those pictures. So the first photograph that I wanted to share is one that I am fairly proud of, and that was a little bit unexpected. So that's not the first one I shared with you earlier in the video because I thought the light was a little bit stronger. I'm going to share this one with you a little bit later. The first thing is the overall composition to me looks rather fluid and also quite minimalistic in some way. Although there are some way it could have been better, I agree. I still think that makes it for a great composition. And here, the use of the wide angle, as you could see, the foreground is really emphasized and really kind of distorted thanks to the bottom of the wide-angle lens. And that's exactly the effect I wanted to give to my foreground. And the beautiful thing with this foreground is that the whole shape of the eyes here is leading me towards this other point here, this other crack in the eyes, and that goes directly towards the mountain on the background. And on top of that, the mountains on the background are a little bit lit from the beautiful light I was mentioning earlier, although later on during the day it got like 10-15 minutes later it got even better. In general, that's really a composition that I like. I would have maybe expected a little bit better feeling if there were not those black rocks on the side, although I find it kind of nice because it frames a little bit the middle ground. So we have our foreground, which is fairly obvious here. Then we have our middle ground, which is this big area of ice, and which is framed by those black stones. And since they're black and they're not light, they're not really distracting our look, and they're like plunging us into the middle of the image. And then we do have, of course, the light that attracts us on the back of the image. So all in all, I feel that this is a rather nice image that I am fairly proud of. Now, the other photograph that I have, which is in landscape orientation, it's that one. And I really like this picture. I can't really explain why I like it so much, but I can explain what's in it and so on, but I really like the feel of this picture. So we do have kind of a similar principle as the previous one with our foreground, our middle ground with the eyes, and our background with the mountains there. But the thing is exactly as I was mentioning to you earlier in the video, is that here we used the foreground as kind of framing for the rest of the image. So we do have a frame at the bottom, and those cracks here are doing the job for this. It kind of does kind of a circle, a half circle here, and that set the bottom of the image, set the foreground. And with nice shapes that we have overall and the difference in colors, it even emphasizes the overall foreground. Now we do have our area of the middle ground, which is rather empty. That was perfect. I really like that a lot. And then we have our mountain on the background. And I guess that in this image, what helps a lot here is the light. As I said, the light got a little bit better later, and that's one of those pictures I captured later. And the light got a little bit glowy and more orangish, and that really added up to the overall composition of this picture, at least the lighting of this picture. To me, that's really a picture that represents fairly well what the use of a wide angle in landscape orientation is. And you might have noticed that this mountain here is not right in the middle, and that was kind of the goal here. I could have placed it right in front, but I thought that the light was so good right on those mountains here that I should maybe focus a bit more on targeting the light than targeting the peak of this mountain that was not so enlightened at that point in time. That's a little bit what the composition I wanted to share with you here. I guess these two images were a good representation of how to use properly a wide-angle lens in landscape and in portrait orientation. If you look at those pictures that I have here, they are like pictures where I use the same principle, where I have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background that are all put together by having a continuity of the foreground towards the background. And also I used a lot the distortion effect of my wide-angle lens in portrait orientation. And that's something you should definitely use, because that's an amazing tool that you have here that allows you this possibility. So take advantage of it, get closer to the ground, and start playing with the distortion of your wide-angle lens. You will be amazed. Now, for the landscape orientation photographs, we have the same principle, obviously, of foreground, middle ground, and background, but really using this framing at the foreground is just wonderful and will do wonders. So that can be a framing like I used here in most of the pictures I'm showing you now. They are like kind of circle shape framing, but in certain cases that could be just straight line going towards a peak, or that could be flowers, that can be vegetation in general that you could use as a framing at the bottom of the foreground of your image, the bottom of the image too. I guess in general, that's the few rules that you need to follow when you want to use a wide angles in a proper way. Okay, we are reaching the end of this video, and I truly hope that you enjoy watching it and that you learn something about wide-angle lenses. In the meantime, if you enjoy those videos, the photography tips I'm sharing with you, and the places I show you, then feel free to click on the subscribe button below. And if you like this video in particular, then you can leave me a thumbs up. That would be amazing. In the meantime, I wish you good luck with your photography and see you next week for new adventures.